Hi everyone, this video is hack C for the everyday shirt, and for this one I've given it more of a Western theme. I always want to do the angled yokes, so this one has trim and I did the special cuffs that you often see on Western shirts. So I was confident with the angled yoke. I figured that one was going to be pretty easy, but it was a bit of trial and error with the sleeve cuffs. So on this one I've just added the usual shirt cuff, but I found it was a lot more difficult to sew the cuff on when you have two layers of fabric at the wrist. So it's got the cream fabric and it's got the contrast fabric, and trying to sew onto a double layer of fabric for the cuff just makes it a little bit harder. So I looked up some doll clothes Western shirts, and I noticed that all of them were done without a separate cuff. So it makes it much easier. All you do is sew the contrast cuff to the sleeve and you don't have to put on an extra cuff. So that one worked out really well when I did it just the cuff, and it just pulls on with no, there's no opening. It just slides on over the hand. So this style worked really well with the sleeve for the everyday shirt, because all you do is leave the cuff off. It's just the right length when you just leave off the cuff, because when you put the cuff on you need a little bit of give to put the arm up and down. But this one, because it's not tight around the wrist, you can still put the arm up and down. It looks the right length. So that was really easy. All I did was add the contrast colour to the bottom of the sleeve with a 1/4 inch seam. So I've sort of sewed it to the wrong side and folded it around to the right side. I did have to adjust the width of the sleeve at the wrist edge. So, but that was really easy too. All I did was I started at a 1/4 inch at the underarm, and as I went down towards the wrist, I just slanted it in so that I ended up with the 1/2 inch seam allowance at the wrist. So that has made my wrist width just enough to go over her fingers without it being too tight. And to finish off this outfit, I just made the classic A-line skirt with a pleat in the front. And so that you can easily do the same, I've added the pattern piece for the skirt with the pleat into the A-line skirt folder that you'll find in the newsletter Dropbox folder. So all you need to do is find that pattern piece and print it out. And I've done that because I tried to make a skirt in the blue fabric for this one, but I placed the regular pattern piece an inch from the fold, the way I sort of was going to leave enough for the pleat, and then I just cut the pattern piece out instead of cutting it with the pleat piece. So I thought, all right, I need to make that easier for everybody. So there's now a pattern piece for the pleat in the front in the newsletter folder. The rest of this video shows step by step how I hacked my 1837 shirt pattern to get the slanted yokes and the Western cuffs. I also do a blog post on how I sew it together. So if you've got your pattern pieces drafted and you're not quite sure how it all goes together, you can just see that on my blog at valspearsewsdolldesigns.blogspot.com. So just remember, drafting your own designs is not all that difficult, and you don't have to copy mine exactly. If you've got a pattern to start with that fits really well, then all you need to do is make your design adjustments and you know it's going to fit. I really enjoy doing that. That's why I've got so many hacks just with the one shirt pattern. I know it's going to fit, and there's lots of different ways I can hack it to make it look really different. So don't forget, like and subscribe if you find this tutorial useful, and I really hope you have a go at it. So this is how I did the Western hack for the Western shirt. This is hack C in my 1837 everyday shirt hack pack 1. If you don't want to draw them out yourself, they will be available in my shop as ready drawn pieces. So this is what they will look like in the shop. So you get them just like the shirt pieces, but they have the hacked pieces. So this is, I'm going to do the back. I've printed off 2 back pieces because I need to do a yoke and a lower back with the seam allowance, and I've printed off 2 front pieces because I need to do a yoke and a lower front with seam allowance, and I need to keep one of the button band pieces if I don't already have a button band from hack B. But if you've done hack B, you can use exactly the same button band. So we'll start with the back, and the same as we did with hack or A and B when we did the yoke, you just judge by eye about halfway down the armhole. So that's where our seam line is going to be. So that's how deep you want the yoke to look. And to do the pointed back, so the back of the Western shirt has this point in it. So we're going to draw a horizontal line as a guide from where we marked, and then we're going to come down 5/8 of an inch to make the point. So when we join these lines, that's going to be our seam line. So we're going to dash it in red. So that's my seam line for the back yoke. And we now have to add the seam allowance. So that comes below. A 1/4 inch seam allowance is good enough. Now, it's easier if you've got one big piece like this and you just cut 2 of them. So you have a main yoke and a lining yoke. So we can do that on this pattern piece. We're going to just trim off the top bit, roughly like that. And then we're going to fold it on the centre back line. Oops, that was a bit off. There we go. Okay, and then we just cut it out. Don't forget to cut on the cutting line and not your seam line. So now we have a back piece that we can easily cut 2. So this is going to be, we're going to put the grain line in, just parallel to the centre back. So this will be, we've already got our number there, so we can say hack C, yoke, cut 2. There we go. So we don't want this one. Okay, so that's the yoke back. So now we need to make a lower back. Alright, so to get my seam line in the same place, I'm just going to fold this piece on the seam line, match it up to my second back piece and mark where it goes. So this is now going to be the seam line for my lower back. Okay, because it's a lower back, we need the seam allowance up above. Right, so that's that one done. And we just cut it on the fold because we only need one of these. Okay, so this one is going to be 1837 shirt. Lower back, whoops, we didn't put haxie. Cut one, unfold. Okay, so now we have the back pieces done. Next, we're going to work on the fronts. So with the front, we need two pieces for the yoke and the lower front. And you're going to cut off the button band, and we're just going to keep one of these button bands if you don't already have one. You cut along the center front line. I'll keep that one for later. Okay, so now we want the front to pretty much match the back. So we're going to fold in our seam line again and just match it at the shoulder and just mark where it comes to at the armhole here. All right, so we're going to draw in our horizontal line as a guide for the point, and we're going to come down 5/8 of an inch. So this is giving us our seam line for the front yoke. So I'm going to dash that in red. And because it's the yoke, we're going to put the seam allowance underneath. So that's our cutting line. And with this one, because of the way the button band goes on, this becomes the cutting line, and we draw a new seam allowance down here. So that's the front yoke, I should say. If you don't want to do all this measuring and cutting yourself, I do make the patterns available in the shop, because not everybody wants to twiddle with hacking a pattern. Though I do know a lot of you enjoy customizing things, and this is just how easy it is. So we're going to throw this piece away and start with a fresh one. We don't need the button band on this one either, so we'll cut this one off. Okay, so this time we're going to do the lower front. So to make the seam lines match, I'm just going to fold along the seam line of my upper front and mark it in So that gives us the seam line for the lower front. So the yoke seam line and the lower front seam line match along the same space because that's where you sew them together. Now because this is the lower front, we need the seam allowance up above. And the same as on the yoke, we need to put in a seam line down what used to be our center front line. So the center front line is no longer our center front line. It's the cutting line with a seam allowance for putting on the button band. So we just cut this one out now. And then I have to make sure I label both of them. I forgot to label my front yoke when I did it. Okay. So we'll label them both now and we'll put in the grain line for the front yoke. And we're going to call it hack C front yoke. And we have to cut four. So we need 2 main yokes and 2 lining yokes. So for this one, it is 1837 shirt, hack C lower front, cut 2. Okay. So there's all the bodice pieces that we need for the back and the front. Now we still, if you don't have a button band piece from hack B, we'll do that next. So hack C uses the same button band as hack B. So we've cut it down the center front line and saved it from one of the pieces that we made the lower front and yoke out of. So to create the new button band, we need to make an extra piece 1/2 inch out from this outer edge. So I'm just going to measure 1/2 inch out from the outer edge, and we want another zig for the zigzags in the top that match the neck when you fold them up. So we want it to zig equal to the one that's already up there. Okay, so that's the new cutting line there, and the bottom just goes straight across. So this folds in, and this is your new seam line that joins to the front once you've sewn the yoke onto the front. So we're just going to do this as a red dashed line, and we're going to call it seam line, seam. Okay, and then so this is a fold line, this is a fold line, and this is the cutting line. So we'll cut this one out. So So as I said before, this is exactly the same as the button band that you cut out for hack B. So you don't have to do another one. Okay, so I'm going to label it 1837 shirt, hack C, button band, cut 2, and we need a similar, a grain line. There we go. So there's all the pieces we need for the shirt so far. So we've got the front, the back, and the button band. So now this one also has a special extra bit on the sleeve to give it a western cuff. So that's what we're going to do next. So to draft the western cuff, you have to print out your sleeve and from the shirt and pin it together so we make a one-piece sleeve. And you need a sheet of paper, and we're going to trace around the sleeve piece. We won't be using the top part, but we'll just trace around it all like this. So that's our cutting line for our sleeve. So first of all, we need to make the wrist end of the sleeve a bit narrower, since we're not going to be putting the shirt cuff on. So measure in from the bottom corner 1/4 inch on each side. And then you go from the underarm down to your 1/4 inch mark. So we've brought the wrist in. Okay, so that's our new cutting line. So we can cut that out. Don't get our lines mixed up. I'm not actually using the top part, but so I don't need to cut that out perfectly. Okay, so now we can work on the sleeve to do the western cuff. So we're going to draw in the new seam lines. Do those with my red pen. Okay, and down the sides. We don't need all the sides because we're going to be cutting off the cuff. And the other side. Okay. So fold your sleeve in half, and we're going to work out the size of our contrast cuff. So mine was 3/8 inch wide at the wrist edge from the seam line to the top of the cuff, and it was 7/8 inch from the seam line to the top of the cuff. So that's exactly how big my cuff is going to be. So next I'm going to draw a smooth curve for the shape of the cuff. Now you want it to look smooth across the center here, so we're going to just draw a little straight line, probably just about 1/4 inch out from the so that's my straight line. If you just sort of go down like this, you're going to get a point at the top. Okay, so I'm just going to sort of sketch it out. Like an S curve. Okay, and that's going to be my seam line. And we need a cutting line 1/4 inch above that. So I'm just going to go along my curve and measure the 1/4 inch. And draw in my new cutting line. Okay, so now I'm going to cut it out, and then I'll finish off the seam line on the other side. Okay, so I'm just going to draw this in. So we need to mark in the grain. The sleeve grain goes straight up and down. And we're going to label it. So it's the 1837 Western cuff. Haxi cut 2. Okay, so to make the shirt sleeve for the Western shirt, you need your sleeve pattern piece and you need your cuff piece, and it will be sewn on. We can adjust the sleeve pattern piece so it fits our cuff by changing our cutting line on each side. I nearly forgot about that. Okay, so we're going to have to relabel this one. 1837 Western sleeve. Haxi cut 2. Okay, so now we've got the sleeve pieces we need for the Western shirt. So there you have it, all the bodice pieces and the sleeve pieces that you need to create this cute Western shirt design. If you need some help with sewing it up, you can find photo tutorials for all of my pattern hacks on my blog, step by step on how I sew it together. So like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any hacks. All you need is a well-fitting basic pattern to get started. For this one, you need a shirt with a collar and stand, like a business shirt. 1837 everyday shirt for 18-inch dolls is a great one to have. Make sure you watch the other hacks for this shirt.